Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to this week's episode of How to Attain Enlightenment. My name is Erica Blackbear, and as always, I will be your host. In this episode, we are going to talk about test runs that the universe has used to prepare me for the manifestation that I'm stepping into. Like I said, I've been on this ride with the universe solely for about 8 years. I'm done being sidetracked. I've gone far enough into my healing journey that I'm ready to pursue my path wholeheartedly. I told my guides and I told the divine, show me the steps. Show me exactly what I need to do to get to where I need to be. I will do whatever you say. I will do whatever I need to do to make this happen. I'm not gonna lie, it's been like a carnival ride, which I love those types of rides. I always have, but this has been a true test of trust and faith, trust in the universe, trust in myself, trust in my guides. It's been a wild, insane loop-de-loo of of things. I have followed every single intuitive nudge and guidance that I have received, no matter how uncomfortable they made me, no matter how it made me look to other people, and no matter if I thought it was pertinent to my path, because the truth is that my human mind cannot conceive of what the divine understands on that level. I can't see the perspective that the divine has. And so the divine always has this bigger perception and perspective, and so can lead me in the direction, in the quickest, because that was the other thing that I was intending with my manifestation, is that show me the quickest, easiest, and most direct path to my dreams. Taking the fast route is not always the easiest route, believe you me. That's why I say that it's been a carnival ride, because I asked for it and I wouldn't change anything. But I'm just saying that the fast route, you're fast tracking your healing, you're fast tracking your experience. So you decide how fast or slow you want this ride to be for yourself. And for me, I'm no nonsense. I want to get to it. I want to experience the things that I'm meant to experience, and I want to do it now. That has not always been the most easy or the most comfortable. Like, there were times where it felt like I'm being squeezed like a tube of toothpaste, and all the junk that I'm carrying, all the beliefs, all the judgments from others, all the healing I needed to do for my past shit. It's like the universe just squeezed it right out of me. And that's great and awesome, but it's also incredibly intense. The faster you're going, the more intense it is, I'll say. So if you're not in for that intense thrill ride of a life, don't take the fast route, is my suggestion. There were many times when I questioned, am I off track? This seems so far from where I thought that I would be, or where I feel like I should be. But I literally just had to trust. You know, there were a few times that I was worried I was losing my faith, because I was just in the depths of the despair, because I had to go there to heal from my past. And you just have to really dive to those depths within yourself and experience those emotions again in order to clear it out, in order to actually look, not shove it down like we often do in the moment of the trauma. We often just shove it down, because how can you heal when you're in it, right? It would be very difficult to actually not internalize what happens during a traumatic experience. Oftentimes we push it down for later. Our soul is thinking, okay, we're going to deal with this later. But a lot of times people are afraid of the depths of those emotions, of uncovering things about themselves, and so they don't dive into it. But I can guarantee you, It's not gone because you're choosing to ignore it. Just because you have your head in the sand about it doesn't mean it's not there. It is still affecting your life. It's still having ripple effects in your life, and you're not creating the life that you want because of that being in your system. But that is a side note for a different podcast episode. Anyway, there were times where I was like, am I losing my faith in this? Am I losing my hope? Because that's what it felt like, because I was in the depths of the despair that I felt as a child. I understood that I was diving into the depths. It was such a visceral experience that it felt like I was losing my hope, and I just felt like I was in this despair for, like, is this ever going to end? Pulled my way out. I stayed on the damn ride, and now I understand it from a different perspective, what it was all for, and I'm grateful for that. You know, there were lessons in trust. There were so many lessons in patience, my God. And you know, there were times where I was like, am I off the track? But anyway, let me just give you some examples of the trial runs. The intentional community, and I'm not going to name them for legal purposes. The intentional community I mentioned in a previous episode, it became very evident that the leadership of that community was not in integrity and was not treating people well. The community was living in fear. So many people in the community were living in fear that they were going to be kicked out, or somebody was going to tattle on them for doing something. You know, it was just this really toxic environment, because that is what the leadership had created, and they hadn't listened. There were many times throughout the years, not necessarily even while I was there, but prior to me being there, where residents who lived there and worked there had voiced that they didn't appreciate what was happening in the community, and that they didn't agree with what the leadership was doing. And instead of hearing them and adjusting appropriately, they would kick people off immediately and harshly. So people were losing their source of income and their housing and their stability and everything else in one fell swoop without even warning, instead of deciding to, like, maybe there's been so many people who have been unhappy here that we should probably look at what we're doing to create this environment. But no, instead of that, it was doubling down, and the leadership was getting more and more paranoid because they're thinking, oh, everybody's out to get me. Like, it was just crazy. And you didn't see it initially when you first landed there, but after being there for a little while, you started to realize, like, wow, this place is real crazy. One of the things that I meant to do here is, I don't want to say take down the power structures, but I will say balance what is happening on the planet that is a negative thing. The powers that be are very controlling and are trying to gain more control and are trying to use their power, and they're not using it in the best way, and they're really harming others, and it's not working, right? The majority of us are feeling the squeeze, are feeling how it's not working, and are seeing more clearly now than in past generations what is actually going on. Now, the universe, because part of the thing that I'm here to do is to address that on a large scale, the universe gave me a trial run at this community, and I was led to, so everybody in that community lived in fear, including myself. I was appointed into a leadership position that didn't mean a lot. It meant more work, a little bit more pay, maybe better housing, but you weren't given the full power to direct your department how it should be directed. You were still micromanaged from the top level in an unhealthy way. Because I had all of my own past experiences with my family and my triggers around getting kicked out of my parents' house when I was way too young, and not having stability in my home environment, not having stability financially. For a couple of years, I did have that underlying fear like the rest of the community members were experiencing. But then I started thinking, enough is enough. My guides guided me to basically call out the leadership. And I did that kind of in secret. I did it in a way where it definitely reverberated around the community, and the community wasn't just at this location. There was also a worldwide ministry. I use that term loosely with this organization, because what would happen is that somebody would speak up and leadership would shut it down. They would immediately kick that person off and kick any of their close friends off. So anybody that aligned with that person was also ostracized, which is why there was so much fear in this community. And also kind of make it known that if you talked about even that person that was kicked off that went against the leadership, you were running the risk of being kicked off as well. It was just this crazy overreach of power. And so the reason why I had to do it, and I wasn't the only one that participated in it, but I was the one that took the blame, essentially, which I didn't care about. I'm not like complaining about that, but I'm just saying that is just the facts of the situation. Because of the fact that somebody gets shut down immediately when they bring something to the leadership, and it doesn't really reverberate around the community. Like, there isn't a chance for other people to hear or even know about sometimes what people are upset about. Because of that, it became clear that in order to kind of address what was happening in the community, and I thought at the time that it was only the leadership at that particular community. I didn't think that the other people who had power in other parts of the world knew what was happening. What we did was we wrote an anonymous email and sent it out community-wide, and it really reverberated. Wow. And the leadership flipped their shit about it. We started calling community meetings, and they were going to track down who did it. And nobody knew who did it for a long time. Like, it was months. And I was forced to sit in these community meetings where the leadership was literally berating the community members, threatening and yelling and screaming at people, trying to figure out who it was that did this. Obviously, that wasn't my or anybody else's intention. That was part of this. And because of the fear that I was holding, I was so uneasy about doing this in the first place. I kept asking my guide, are you sure this is the right thing? Are you sure this is what I should be doing? It's putting everything at risk. But what I came to understand was my guides were like, your time here is done anyway. This is not healthy. Being in this environment is no longer serving you in any way, shape, or form, because what you got out of the other aspects of this community, you've already learned what you needed to learn. Like, you've outgrown this community. And my guides are like, you will be safe and protected. They kept saying that. You will be safe and protected. We are protecting you. Just do the thing that we're asking you to do. And it didn't seem like anything came of it. I mean, I ended up getting kicked out. They didn't say it was for that. I was like, what was the reason? For a couple years after, why did I even be a part of this? I don't understand what this was for. Now I understand the universe was using me kind of like a warning shot. You're being given a warning. Are you going to continue down the path that you've doubled down multiple times on this way of being? Are you going to continue this path? And they did. They even got worse after I left. Bigger picture was that I was being given a trial run of what needs to happen on a large scale on the planet, and also taught me what I would and wouldn't do again in that scenario. After leaving that community, I was shown to go to the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. My sister had been living there for a long time prior, so that was the reason why I ended up there. I lived in Colorado for 10 years, and I loved Colorado so much, but I did recognize that it was time to move forward in life. For the longest time, they couldn't figure out who had done the email. Somehow they figured out that I was a part of it, whether somebody ratted on me or whether the tech people figured out where it was coming from, although we did a lot to cover our tracks. It wasn't like we sent it from a computer at the community or anything like that. Anyway, the point is that it did show me that I was safe and protected. So I was asked to leave the community along with anybody else that was perceived to be potentially a part of that. Okay, so that was right when the pandemic hit also. So the pandemic hit only a couple months before I was kicked out of that community. So the pandemic was the cover. They're being asked to leave because of the pandemic, which was actually good for me because I ended up being able to get unemployment. So I not only did I lose my job, but then I lost my housing. And having 2 kids at that point, I'm like, what am I going to do? So that's why I ended up in Michigan. So the whole thing was trust. And the leadership figured out it was me, and I never told them who else was involved. I refused. And I was forced to go into this restorative circle with the leadership. The leadership always expected everybody to bow down to them. As soon as they figured out that you did something wrong, you were supposed to basically like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, please forgive me, leadership. But I refused to do that. I held my integrity in that restorative circle, and I actually said to their faces what I thought and felt. I held my ground. I stood my ground, and to this day, I'm proud of myself for doing that, because you're in this situation with multiple leadership people, and they're all trying to intimidate you, and I held my ground, and I stayed in my integrity. I voiced my truth in that. And regardless of anything else, I was able to do that. And you know what? I'm proud of myself for that. So point being, I was safe and protected. After I was asked to leave, I went, like I said, to Michigan. The pandemic had just hit, and the timing of everything could not have been more perfect. The U.S. government had just passed the pandemic unemployment and the pandemic assistance. Not only were they giving out the checks to people, so that was holding me over, but I was also able, because where I lived and worked was a nonprofit religious organization, I would not have qualified for regular unemployment. But the government had just passed the pandemic unemployment, which did cover me. So I was able to actually get unemployment after I left, because they technically had me fired because of the pandemic. That was what the official thing was. I was able to get the pandemic unemployment. I mean, talk about being safe and protected. Like, holy shit, the universe had my back. And so I was able to get that for a year. And then that was the first time in my life that I was able to actually support my family and not work. Not work in that I was still working towards my manifestations. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I was sitting on my butt and not doing anything. I took that opportunity to really dive further, deeper than ever before into my healing process, because I knew that I needed to heal completely in order to attain enlightenment. I knew that that was part of the steps of the process. I also knew that I needed to unwind the stress hormones and the stress response, that my body was in this perpetual adrenal fatigue loop because I was overworking myself and pushing past my comfort level so often that my body was just in that constant fight or flight mode. And it was so unhealthy. My cortisol levels had to be through the roof. I knew what was happening within my body system, my stress responses and my PTSD and my anxiety. There were points in my life where it was absolutely horrific. But at this point, I was still experiencing it occasionally. I knew that, actually my guides knew that in order to unwind that and to help me really fully heal those aspects of myself, now I understand, I needed the space to just be. And I had not had that space until this year where I got the unemployment. So what seemed to be a very scary situation and seemed to be a situation where I was being kicked out of my home, I was losing my job, and I had to trust that my guides had my back, and they did. They did have my back. And had my back so much that it was a better situation than I had been in, because being in that environment at the community was also triggering fight or flight response. There was an underlying fear. There was an underlying larger fear in the community as a whole, but there was my own fear around this stability and safety there. So the point is that when you're in line with the divine, when you're in line with what you're here to do and what you're meant to do and you're working towards it, the universe is going to take care of you. And even when it seems like you're headed in a scary direction and you're not sure, that is especially when you need to trust, because that is the universe realigning you to something better. Now, I was in Michigan for probably about a year and a half. I knew it was just a stopping off point. I knew that it wasn't going to be where I would set up shop. It just wasn't my home. But there were so many things that came of that stopping point. There was multiple different things that were offshoots of that experience. I had been being given the message that your stopping over point here is done. It's time to move on. There was another trial run that happened. It was me moving from Michigan to California. It had started percolating in, okay, it's time to move on. As time went on, the messages were getting louder. You need to leave now. You're going to miss your window. You have to go now. And I'm like, where am I going? I had moved multiple times, but I had always had a job lined up because I was a responsible mom who was a single mom who needed to have stability for my child. This was the first time where I was being asked to completely trust and not know what I was headed into. I had this Hyundai Santa Fe that worked awesome. So it was in Colorado. But then when I drove it out to Michigan, it was over 200,000 miles and it had started breaking down. I ended up selling it for parts, and then there was a series of issues having cars because this was during the pandemic where there was the shortage of cars, if you remember that happened, and car prices have skyrocketed. When I was being told that it was time to leave, it was after my pandemic unemployment ran out because you could only get it for a year. I didn't have a lot of cash. I'm like, I need money to move. This is when I first started my business, was when I was in Michigan. I was like, okay, I'm going to start this healing and psychic medium business. I was doing some sessions for people, but I really was not making much money. I had some money from my tax return and I had put it into this vehicle, the only flippin' vehicle that I could find in that area, because it's a string of small towns. It's very limited for resources and for amenities and stuff. I had finally found this Nissan that I bought. I think I talked him down to $900. It was the last of my money. I had maybe $200 left after that. My guides were guiding me to do this. I followed my guidance. I went to get this vehicle, and on the drive back, it was about maybe 40 minute drive. On the drive back, the thing broke down. And I was like, oh my God. So I'm thinking, what happened? I'm off track. I didn't do the right thing. That's where my mindset went. At some point, it's not going over 30 miles an hour. So I limp it to a car parts store and I park it there and I get a ride. And I deal with it in the morning. It needed a new battery and an alternator. Like, fuck. That was literally the last of my money. I put it into the car and I'm just going to hope and pray. And this is when I started door dashing. Door dashing was a good situation for me for a couple of years. It was a good side hustle while I was also running my business. I had this Nissan and I'm trying to DoorDash with it to get money to leave. And this vehicle keeps overheating. Now, I don't know anything about vehicles and I didn't have the money to take it and to get it fixed. I had a mechanic friend. I think I called him and he was like, well, just put in more coolant and see if that helps. So I did, and it did. It helped, but it kept happening. So then it's like, okay, there's a leak somewhere. Where's the leak? I didn't know. I only had this vehicle for maybe a month or a month and a half. And then I was like, I don't know what to do with this vehicle. I managed to DoorDash enough through this, gather as much money as I can to go, because I'm getting the message, you need to leave now. Now, this is late November, early December. That would have been 2021. I'm looking around and still keeping an eye out for a vehicle. I'm like, there's no way this Nissan's going to make it out to I knew at this point I was going to California. that had dropped in. And I was getting the message that it was going to be an intentional community of sorts, but when I was reaching out to any ashrams, intentional communities, which there are tons of in California, all of them were like, we're not taking new people because of the pandemic. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna go. And I just kept feeling like there was going to be an intentional community of sorts that I was going to land at, but I don't know where that's going to be because I contacted so many different places and all of them told me the same thing. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm not supposed to know. So I'm looking for a vehicle that's going to make it out to California because the Nissans aren't going to make it. So, and my guides are just like, just trust. And I'm like, okay. I gather as much as I could of the money to get me there. And I did not have much. And I sold my vehicle. I made my money back. Like the person that bought the vehicle, I was not sketchy about it. I told him exactly what was going on. He knew about cars. And because there was such an issue, no, he paid me more. I made money on this vehicle. That's the craziest part about it. He knew what he was doing with vehicles. I don't know if he was a mechanic. He came with one of those computer systems to be able to check what was going on with it. Because I was honest, but I listed it for more, assuming somebody's going to try to talk me down, you know? And so I put it for $1,400 where I was listing it. And the guy comes and he's like, well, there's nothing wrong with it mechanically. He's like, literally, it's a hose that had a leak. That is what's wrong with it the whole freaking time. And he's like, this is such an easy fix. I'll fix this, no problem. I need to borrow money from my mom in order to be able to do this. Will you hold it for me for the week and I will give you the full $1,400? Yes, I sure frickin' will. So he comes back and he was true to his word, comes back with the $1,400 and I made money off of this vehicle. This is the kind of crazy shit that happens when you follow, you know, it is uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable because in the time I'm super stressed out. I'm like, oh my God, like, how am I going to make any money off of this vehicle? How am I going to get to California? I'm selling this vehicle without having another vehicle because I need the money from this vehicle to get the other vehicle. It was like that. So I sold it, made money off of it. And between some of the little money that I could gather from readings and from door dashing and stuff, I ended up being able to buy. So I was looking for an SUV because it's more comfortable. At the time I had my dog, Coda, who's big. He was a big boy. And then I have my toddler, she was a toddler at the time, so a car seat, and myself. And so I'm thinking, we're all going to California and, you know, it's going to be more comfortable in a bigger vehicle. So I'm looking and I'm not seeing any SUVs. And I'm like, okay, that's not good. But then I kept getting the ping to look for a Hyundai, which is what my Santa Fe was. So I'm looking up Santa Fe's. Nothing is within 7 hours of where I'm living to be able to find a Santa Fe. Well, I come across this Hyundai Accent, which is the smallest of their vehicles. I mean, this thing was tiny. It was a compact car. It was a small ass vehicle, but it only had 107,000 miles on it. They wanted 1,500, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna ask them if they'll take 1,000 because I barely have more than that, and I need to get out to California. And I knew I was going to DoorDash along the way. And so I'm like, I need a vehicle that's going to be able to let me DoorDash. So I'm putting so many miles on this thing. So I go look at it. And the whole time I test drive it and I'm so nervous because I'm like, this is my last chance. If this car breaks down, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no money in savings, no backup plan, no cushion, to fall back on. I'm buying this vehicle, trusting my guides that this thing is not only going to make it out to California, but it's going to make it for all the door dashing miles that I put on it. Holy crap. This is a real exercise in trust. So I'm super nervous. I'm like, am I reading my guidance right? Because I knew that the more worked up I am, the harder it is for me to get a clear guidance. But I did feel like this was the right choice. And I felt like I was being guided to that for a reason. So I said, all right. I offered them 1,000. They had listed it for 1,500. They agreed. I bought it for $1,000 and it had new tires on it, which was the only thing. There was no bells and whistles on this vehicle. It was old school, just the radio, and that was the only thing in this vehicle. I don't even think we did have cruise control initially, but it stopped working. The windows weren't even electric. It was roll down windows in this thing. And I had not had like a car in probably 15 years prior to this. It felt like a downgrade to me, but this vehicle did everything I needed it to do. I DoorDashed the whole way. We took our time. We explored because there's no rush. I don't have a job to get to in California. What am I doing? I'm DoorDashing, and it was so much freedom. I loved it. So we just explored the U.S. on the way. We spent some time in Colorado, and we went to New Mexico, and we just took the scenic route, and I explored so much of California when I got there. It was December when I left the UP, which I could not take another winter, by the way, up in the UP. Lord, those winters were intense. I am not a winter person. I am a tropical girl. Like, put me in the tropics. I'm gonna go south because that's warmer. We literally camped the whole way. We're camping, and we just made it work. It was such a freeing experience though. And I already knew, because I had lived in an RV, I had lived in a Volkswagen van before. I knew I could do that type of lifestyle. I mean, it was difficult at first in that vehicle. It was not 100% pleasant, but like, holy crap, like I did it, you know? Then we get to California, and I still don't know what I'm doing. I still haven't heard back from some of the communities I had reached out to. Nothing was moving on that front. So I just keep doing what we're doing. So I'm just exploring. We ended up in the San Diego area, and I'm exploring some of the desert areas, some of the parks, and then I go back to the coast, and we're going up the coast, and we're, you know, hitting the beaches in LA, and we enjoyed ourselves. All of us really enjoyed ourselves. We were outside all the time in the elements. We were in the ocean. We just really had an amazing time. And we had the hot springs and Palm Springs. Like, we thrived. The interesting thing was that my sister ended up out in California about the same time I did. My whole roundabout way of getting there, by the time I was in the area that she ended up in, she had already been there for like a month. I'm not planning on living with her. That wasn't the intention, but I was able to have a stopover at her house for a couple of weeks. Okay, prior to me going to my sister. So I wasn't going to just show up at her door. I refused to do that. And I was like, all right, guys, I need to know, what are we doing here? We had been traveling around for months at this point, and I was kind of like, okay, can we get settled? I want a home base. It was probably late February, and I randomly didn't even think about this person, but my friend saw a Facebook post of mine and realized I was in California and that I had literally just up and moved. And she called me and she's like, what are you doing out here? And because she lives in California. And I explained the whole crazy ass story about following my guides. And she's like, oh my God, you need a place to land. She's like, come here. She owns a ranch. You could almost call it an intentional community because there are multiple people living here in different types of housing situations. My intuitive hit on us landing at an intentional community was not far off. It's not officially an intentional community, but it is a communal living situation. And I mean, what the like, there's no other explanation for this other than divine guidance. It was another trial run. I had to learn to trust without knowing what I was walking into. The trial run from my move from Michigan to California, and seeing how I was held and seeing how I was supported through that journey without having the knowledge of what I was stepping into, was the trial run for what I'm walking into now. And in a different podcast episode, I will explain what has been occurring now, because it's even bigger than what I experienced then, and that was a big thing. The trial run showed me that I could trust without knowing exactly what I was stepping into, that I could trust the divine to have my back no matter what, and they did. We were so safe and so protected through that whole experience. And what an experience. Like, the amazing things we got to see and experience, and the beauty of California, and the people we met along the way, and the help we received. Like, it was top notch. And that is the trial run for what I'm walking into now. There was another trial run that happened, and that would be my business. I'm going to end this episode here, and I will go into the business piece of it in another podcast episode. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you next week.